created the mess we're in, and now you're saying, sorry, trust us.
As much as $50 billion.
No interior da crise financeira.
Wall Street got bailed out and Main Street didn't.
Como chegamos aqui?
Other banks were taking these ideas and applying them in ways that they'd never expected.
Once the seed was planted, there wasn't any stopping it.
We never imagined. They were just taking the risk.
And it came right back like a boomerang.
It turned into a Frankenstein monster.
Diariamente, chegam a Wall Street milhares de trabalhadores. Trabalham em bancos, corretoras, seguradoras, credores hipotecários e fundos de cobertura. É o maior setor da economia americana. Uma indústria que representa quase o dobro do setor industrial da América. Um negócio com um poder fortíssimo e um alcance global. Foi esta indústria que levou a América e o mundo a caírem na maior crise económica desde a Grande Depressão. Os bancos dizem que existem para criar riqueza, tendo à sua guarda os nossos bens coletivos, e prometem investir os trilhões de dólares que nos pertencem, que jorram de negócios, fundos de pensões e contas de poupança. Numa manhã do outono de 2011, os banqueiros que chegam à zona da Baixa de Manhattan são surpreendidos. A recessão tinha destruído 11 trilhões do património líquido dos americanos. A recuperação parecia distante. Os Occupy Wall Street queriam responsabilizar os banqueiros.
Most Americans think, and with good reason, that Wall Street got bailed out and Main Street didn't. We have very high unemployment. We lost 8.5 million jobs in the recession.
Please join in.
People's houses aren't worth what they paid for them. A lot of them don't have jobs. Their kids are graduating from college and are moving back in.
It is pretty clear, actually, that there was massive illegality going on. And if somebody with subpoena power was intent on prosecuting that, I don't think there's really much doubt that they would be quite successful in criminal prosecutions.
Em poucas semanas, as manifestações dos Occupy espalharam-se por várias cidades da América e do mundo, exigindo mudanças radicais no sistema bancário. Para os banqueiros, a resposta era levantar as mangas e seguir em frente.
Some of our companies made a series of bad mistakes. And we all paid for them, including, and it led to the economic crisis.
But what makes people upset is that, I mean, a lot of the people that are on the streets demonstrating, Occupy Wall Street, is that the economy hasn't recovered, but banks have.
If you want a strong economy, you have to have financial services companies that are safe and sound and able to lend and able to finance their customers. Now, if you want to have a recession, then go ahead and hammer the banks and make sure that they fail, because then you'll have another recession.
Do you understand why they're angry? Do you have any comment? Mr. Blankfein, can we ask you a question, sir? You're going to give the American people an accounting of how you spent their money? And do you understand why it is they're angry at bankers? Do you have any regrets about the way you've spent the taxpayers' money?
Absolutely not. I do.
Desde a fusão de 2008, já houve dúzias de audiências.
We regret that people have lost money, and whatever we did, whatever the standards of the time were, it didn't work out well.
I would like to ask your opinion of the role that over-the-counter derivatives
Têm sido feitas muitas perguntas,
contributing to the financial crisis.
mas tem havido poucas respostas satisfatórias.
what goes on at Wall Street and exactly what caused the crisis and how did we get where we are, it's difficult to understand, even for professionals.
I'm not sure I understand that point. Maybe you could elaborate.
Well, I think it's, in many ways, it's very simple. I think our regulators and the industry have to focus on complexity.
But at the end of the day, people usually have a pretty good ability to tell when something's wrong.
Somehow we just missed, that home prices don't go up forever.
What is a synthetic CDO?
A CDO is a pool of assets.
I think finance may have gotten too complicated for anyone to understand.
That are pooled together and then can be sliced. In a synthetic, you pool reference securities that are indexed to specific pools of mortgages.
And that the managers of these large financial institutions, in some ways, have been given an impossible task, that they won't be able to comprehend what it is their institutions are doing. And that is really, really scary.
You created the mess we're in, and now you're saying, sorry, trust us. You created CDOs who created credit default swaps that never existed a few years ago. Who was the brilliant person who came and said, let's do credit default swaps? Find him, fire him.
É difícil identificar as causas da crise financeira da América. Mas o fim de semana na estância de Boca Raton, na Flórida, é um bom ponto de partida. Em junho de 1994, reuniu-se aqui um grupo de jovens banqueiros do JP Morgan. Na época, tudo parecia muito inocente.
Boca Raton was a gathering of people that were part of the global derivative group at JP Morgan. In part as a celebration, in part as an opportunity to relax, but perhaps much more importantly, as an opportunity to get creative, innovative people together in a room to discuss a whole variety of different topics.
And since they were young, mostly in their 20s, and since there was plenty of money floating around and they were full of high spirits, they did what any young bunch of kids would do, and they got drunk, they had parties, they threw each other in pools. This is the normal stuff that happens at conferences.
Yes, I went into the pool fully clothed, as did my boss. Some people drank, some people didn't. I'm happy to say that most people stayed reasonably sober.
Divertiram-se muito, mas também trabalharam muito. Dedicaram-se à análise de um problema antigo: como reduzir o risco. A primeira jornalista a contar a história do JP Morgan foi Gillian Tett.
They began to look for ways to enable financial institutions to pass risk between them. One way to do that was to sell loans. Another way, though, was to separate out the risk of a loan going bad from the loan itself. And out of that came this drive to develop credit default swaps.
Credit default swaps, uma espécie de derivado que assegura um empréstimo com default. Tradicionalmente, os derivados eram uma forma de apostar no futuro valor de qualquer coisa. Durante centenas de anos, os agricultores transacionaram derivados para se protegerem das flutuações dos preços das colheitas. É o tipo de derivado que tem sido transacionado na Bolsa de Mercado de Chicago, juntamente com o futuro dos combustíveis, da moeda e dos metais preciosos. Em Boca Raton, a equipa do JP Morgan compreendeu que podia usar derivados de crédito para transacionar os riscos dos seus empréstimos.
Bankers borrowed one set of ideas that had been developed in the commodities market and applied it to loans for the first time. This idea was essentially created under the banner of making the financial system safer.
O primeiro grande credit default swap foi idealizado por Blythe Masters e envolveu a Exxon.
Exxon was the client of the bank, and we had credit exposure associated with that relationship.
The Exxon Valdez spewed almost 11 million gallons of oil.
No rescaldo do derrame de petróleo do Exxon Valdez e de uma chuva de processos, a Exxon acionou uma carta de crédito de vários milhões de dólares sobre o JP Morgan.
A letter of credit creates credit risk. If Exxon were to fail on their obligations, then JP Morgan would have to step in and make good on those obligations on their behalf. It was a large amount of exposure, and there was a significant amount of risk associated with that.
E esse risco é um enorme sugador para um banco.
Every time a bank makes a loan, under banking regulations, they're required to set aside certain reserves of capital for the loan. So JP Morgan, when they made the loan to Exxon, would have had to set aside some capital.
JP Morgan has to hold certain capital relative to the size of that loan in the event the loan is not paid off at 100% as you expect. Well, of course, if you don't have to do that and you're a bank, you'd prefer not to do that.
Because then you can finance more freely, you can take on more debt.
Right.
Então, Masters estudou quem poderia assumir o risco associado ao crédito e libertar o capital do JP Morgan. Encontrou um comprador em Londres, o European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, o EBRD.
EBRD would receive compensation from JP Morgan for taking on or assuming credit risk and felt that that was a good risk-reward proposition. And so risk was essentially dispersed. And why did JP Morgan do that? Because we wanted to free up our capacity to do more business.
Era uma importante inovação financeira. Os derivados de crédito permitiam que um banco contornasse as exigências de capital.
And that's what actually happened, is the amount of capital that banks had to hold got less. And so banks became able to create more and more credit. They could make more loans.
O negócio da Exxon foi apenas o início. Demonstrar esse risco poderia representar um alívio e libertação de capital. O JP Morgan tinha descoberto o ouro. Em 1998, decidiram aumentar a operação de derivados de crédito. Naquele ano, entrou para a equipa outra jovem banqueira, Terry Duhan.
Part of my job was to come in as a trader and to build a credit derivative trading book, including all the risk management around the more exotic products. That was what I was brought in to do.
Anteriormente, o JP Morgan tinha emitido credit swaps sobre companhias como a Exxon. Foi pedido a Duhan que emitisse swaps sobre dívidas individuais.
The idea was, let's put together a portfolio of credit risk, a portfolio of names.
A sua primeira transação foi um credit default swap sobre 306 empresas dos registros do JP Morgan.
And that list of 306 entities, they were very highly rated. They had very low credit risk.
And the credit default swap was insuring JP Morgan against default by those 306 entities.
That's
many of
correct.
them Fortune 500 companies or other.
It would have been some of your most well-known household names. And so we were giving investors an opportunity to, in effect, invest in our loan portfolio.
JP Morgan did a lot of work, did a lot of due diligence to assemble this portfolio of loans. And you can get it in one easy, bite-sized piece.
E o banco facilitou, dividindo o portfólio em diferentes tranches e níveis de risco. Os investidores podiam escolher o nível de risco que estavam dispostos a correr.
Different investors wanted different levels of risk. There were some investors that wanted to earn a big return on really risky stuff. And there were some investors that wanted to earn a little return on stuff that wasn't risky at all.
A partir daí, o banco tentou expandir o seu negócio ainda mais.
So along comes this idea. What if we could create a market where people were able to buy and sell freely, independently of the companies themselves, the risk associated with lending to those companies?
Começaram então a vender derivados que eram simplesmente apostas em todos os portfólios, quer fossem propriedade do banco ou não. Estes produtos passaram a ser conhecidos como obrigações de dívida colateralizadas sintéticas, CDOs sintéticas.
There were investors who were able to invest in some entities that they had not had access to before.
By buying a credit default swap.
By investing in a credit default swap because it was a name that they hadn't previously had access to. So there was a lot of very positive reinforcement of the market, and it just grew. It grew very naturally. Once the seed was planted, there wasn't any stopping it.
Foi o início de um novo e corajoso mundo livre da banca.
This was pretty new stuff.
This was incredibly new stuff. It was amazing. It was clearly a product that was in need. We had identified a need.
A maioria dos membros do grupo global de derivados do JP Morgan rondava os 20 anos, incluindo Masters e Duhan. Mas com a criação do mercado dos Credit Default Swaps, fizeram história na banca.
What in the long run this all meant was that credit, which is a vital part of the lifeblood of any economy, the global economy, became a more readily available asset. And the thinking was that that would be an unambiguously positive thing. Credit helps drive growth, helps companies deploy capital, helps employment, etc. It wasn't any longer just an idea in a room in Florida, it was the creation of an entire marketplace.
O risco podia agora ser facilmente transacionado. Alimentou um boom de crédito em todo o mundo. Pouco depois, outros bancos entusiasmaram-se com os lucros dos derivados de crédito. Paul LeBlanc era um vendedor de derivados no Morgan Stanley e recorda a pressão para a concretização de negócios.
The volume of transactions was just exploding. I mean, I used to know all the statistics because I used to talk about it every meeting, how this is a growing market. You have to get your customers involved.
You can see the NASDAQ getting a nice...
They can make money, we can make money.
Morgan Stanley, a whopping 17...
It was a massively important sector for us to focus on, derivatives.
E, acima de tudo, era um mercado privado, afastado e sem regulamentação.
See, unlike an exchange-traded market, where all the banks can see all the positions, there's no public market for these derivatives. You can't look in the newspaper and get a price for them. These are all private, off-exchange markets, and nobody else in the market knows what's going on.
Sendo um mercado opaco, os spreads, a diferença entre o que o banco podia cobrar pelos derivados e o custo para fornecê-los, podiam ser enormes.
How much were these things making for the bankers that were selling them?
The spreads on derivatives are several times larger than on comparable cash securities, just as a general rule. And that's why the banks trade them.
Cash securities being those that
equities, bonds.
Well, paint some picture of that and the kind of money that people were making.
The best reference that you could give is that if you look at, say, the spread that a bank might earn doing an IPO for Facebook, they're going to maybe make 1% to bring out that IPO, very hot IPO.
And a secretive banking system.
If you were doing the same size deal in a derivative security, you might make 10 times the fee.
For the filthy rich. This is the palm.
And the basic business that they created was immensely profitable. But there's a problem with all of this. Most people in finance assume risk can be eliminated. But all you can do is move it around from one party to another party.
Em Washington, a preocupação era crescente.
We are moving towards greater risk. We must do something to address the regulation of hedge funds and especially derivatives in this country. $33 trillion, a substantial amount of it held by the 25 largest banks in this country, a substantial amount being traded in proprietary accounts of those banks. That kind of risk overhanging the financial institutions of this country, one day, with a thud, will wake everyone up.
Circulavam propostas para dominarem os mercados e regularem os derivados.
What are you trying to protect?
We're trying to protect the money of the American public, which is at risk in these markets.
Brooklyn Bourne, diretora da Commodity Futures Trading Commission, conduziu a acusação.
We are the regulator which has been given the authority to oversee the major derivatives markets.
Brooksley Bourne was absolutely right, because what she said is if you don't have transparency and regulation of derivatives, the risks are going to build up and they're going to lead to a financial crisis that's going to cause massive taxpayer bailout.
Os bancos lutaram para evitar uma regulamentação de derivados.
The banks didn't want anyone to know how much risk they were taking on. They didn't want to have to quantify it on their balance sheet. They wanted to be able to push it off and hide it, and that was why they lobbied so hard to make sure that swaps and derivatives would be treated differently from other kinds of financial products.
Outros queriam que fossem regulamentados como os seguros.
One of the most heavily regulated products in the country are insurance products for all the obvious reasons. If you're going to write insurance, you have to have enough money to pay off that insurance.
But if you write a credit default swap, you don't have to have that same amount of money on hand.
Or anything else, including, importantly, no disclosure.
So you're saying it's a kind of under-the-table insurance agreement that avoids regulation?
It's an insurance product designed not to be regulated as an insurance product and designed to avoid regulation at all. And one thing we do know is that when a product of any type is designed with minimal regulation, capital and activity moves into that area and it expands dramatically.
Regulation of derivatives transactions that are privately negotiated by professionals is unnecessary.
Alan Greenspan, presidente da Reserva Federal, pôs-se do lado dos bancos.
Hinders the efficiency of markets.
Alan Greenspan was coming from a very libertarian tradition. Keep your hands off everything. The markets will sort themselves out. And if there's a problem, then we'll clean up afterwards. And then that really was the way the Federal Reserve operated under his leadership for almost 20 years.
No Capitólio, os apoiantes da desregulamentação dos bancos fizeram apelos fortes e urgentes.
The future of America's dominance as the financial center of the world is at stake.
Antes deles, havia legislação para levantar restrições sobre o modo como os bancos deviam negociar.
Pass this bill, we could find London or Frankfurt or Shanghai becoming the financial capital of the world.
This bill is going to make America more competitive, and that's important.
E legislação para evitar a fiscalização dos derivados de crédito.
Paying jobs not just on Wall Street in New York City, but it affects every business in America, and it benefits every consumer in America, and we do it by repealing Glass-Steagall.
It's the most important example of our efforts here in Washington to maximize the possibilities of the new information age global economy.
No final, os bancos cresceram e os derivados mantiveram-se na penumbra.
The derivatives market went into darkness, almost no transparency and no regulation. And what you see is this explosion in the growth of derivatives in the United States and throughout the world.
Os bancos tinham ganho o dia. Os credit default swaps eram agora introduzidos nos novos mercados.
The next application of this same technology was to portfolios of consumer credit risk, and in particular, mortgage-related credit risk.
E quanto maior o risco, melhor.
What everyone is trying to create is something that has a high rating and a high yield. That's the holy grail, that's the goal, is to mix together assets in some way so that you come out with a AAA and a big return.
Então, a Wall Street conheceu as recompensas por subsidiar o sonho americano. Assim como tinham acumulado empréstimos coletivos, os banqueiros acumulavam agora hipotecas.
You would buy these big pools of mortgages, and these credit default swaps enabled you to bundle all this stuff together, bring it in-house in order to get it ready to put through the sausage-making machine and create these securities.
Os banqueiros investiram os seus dólares por todo o país, principalmente em estados onde se pretendessem níveis históricos de crescimento populacional. Locais como a Flórida, Nevada, Califórnia. E aqui, a Georgia.
Well, Atlanta was one of the hottest markets in the country, the Atlanta region.
Roy Barnes é o antigo governador da Georgia.
Georgia was the fourth fastest growing state at the turn of this last century, and the fastest growing state east of the Mississippi. So it was a hot market to start with.
Eleito em 1998, Barnes é famoso por ter levado para Wall Street o crédito subprime, mercado que a rua tinha tradicionalmente evitado.
In the 80s, there was no place for subprime. Nobody wanted it. The banks wouldn't buy it because there was a higher risk. And what really changed the appetite for subprime mortgage was you could securitize it, and you could sell it on Wall Street. They do it in tranches, and then they wrap it up so they could be packaged together and have an overall higher yield.
Nearly half of all new single-family home construction is in the South. Now more than 50,000 a month.
And of course, Moody's says AAA. So it was just a feeding frenzy. I mean, it was just an absolute feeding frenzy for subprime mortgages.
With the economy strong, home buyers are willing and able to spend double what they did just 2 decades ago.
And you could just about drive by a bank and they'd throw loan paper in your car as you passed by. Became very loose.
Mas o que os bancos da Wall Street não viram ou não viam era o que estava a acontecer pelos Estados Unidos. Uma onda de abusos de empréstimos.
The Wild West experience in home mortgages was well underway.
41-year-old Esime Hector, mother of 3, agreed to a second mortgage at 27.5%.
We were creating mortgages that we had never seen before, and they were being created faster and faster.
The interest rate on these loans was as high as 42%.
We saw borrowers given loans that were greater than the value of their home. The home buyers were getting loans that had no income.
When you have a high interest rate, then you have high points, then you have prepayment penalties, when you have balloon payments, when you have adjustable rate mortgages, and when you layer those bad practices on top of a high interest rate, it becomes predatory.
We don't need rhetoric.
Os advogados de habitações por todo o país contrataram credores predatórios.
People are tricked into owing more money than they could ever dream.
Mas uma das lutas mais ferozes foi aqui na Geórgia.
There's a way out.
Governor Barnes and others are making a last
sobre o que se chamava Georgia Fair Lending Act.
It's up right now on the House floor, a governor's bill to crack down.
Os credores hipotecários e os bancos ripostaram.
None of these people have a clue of what's going on. Nobody here understands the business, and they didn't let us speak.
You would have thought I had recommended that we repeal the plan of salvation.
You know what we need? Predatory.
And why were they so opposed to it? Money. Money.
This bill will cripple the mortgage business. It's going to cripple real estate sales. It's going to absolutely devastate the home market in Georgia. I can guarantee you.
There were threats that the residents in Georgia wouldn't be able to get mortgages anymore because investors would not buy the mortgages in Georgia. If that were true, no bank would create a mortgage in Georgia.
Georgia now has the toughest predatory lending law in the nation.
Apesar dos esforços do lobby das hipotecas, o projeto de lei passou. Receando projetos de lei noutros estados, o lobby ajudou a destruir Barnes e a rescindir a lei.
Right after Governor Barnes' defeat in November, one of the top legislative priorities for the new governor and the new legislature was to gut the Georgia Fair Lending Act. I think it was about 2 weeks into the new legislative session, and it was gutted.
No let-up in the housing boom, which is good for the economy. Homes were selling last month at a record clip. The main reason, low mortgage rates.
Os grandes bancos continuaram a acumular e a vender mais portfólios de hipotecas.
Fueling the nation's strong housing market.
Cada vez mais, estes CDOs continham uma dívida de alto risco. Para manter as agências de rating a funcionar, foram vendidos mais credit default swaps.
Let's say I have a pool of mortgages. I have 1,000 mortgages from California, and I want to package these up. But I decide, well, some of these mortgages may be subprime, and I want to buy a little bit of credit default insurance.
And by doing that, you improve the profile,
in theory, yes,
of your CDO.
That's right.
So that you can sell it better.
I could go get a rating for it, too. I could go to Moody's and say, look, I have laid off 2% of the risk on this portfolio. Shouldn't I get a better rating than if I just sold the pool as it was?
So you take a lot of crap.
That's
a lot of mortgages that are people are not going to pay. Right, okay. But you insure it, and the credit agency says, hey, that's a good idea.
Yes, yes.
New home sales jumped 13% over a year ago, while existing home sales rose 4.5%, setting a new record.
A equipa do JP Morgan trabalhava também com a dívida hipotecária, mas não estavam certos da sua eficácia.
We traded mortgages. We had some mortgages on our books. We certainly understood the mortgage-backed security market, but we had a lot of trouble getting comfortable with that risk. The big hang-up for us was data. We had years and years of historical data about how corporates performed during business cycles, but we didn't have that much data about how retail mortgages performed during different business cycles.
We knew how much money people said they were making. We saw that UBS and Merrill Lynch had securitized products earnings that were growing faster than ours. And we asked ourselves the question, what are we doing wrong? What are we missing? Have we not figured out how to lay off some of this risk? And honestly, we couldn't figure it out. What we never imagined was that those other firms weren't doing anything at all. They were just taking the risk and sitting with it.
Sales of new single-family homes shot up.
The first wave of JP Morgan bankers who had developed these original ideas in the 1990s, when they saw what was starting to happen,
it's the biggest one-month gain.
Essentially other banks were taking these ideas and applying them in ways that they'd never expected. Some of them began to get very worried.
We were just about to say done on a transaction. We had a global phone call and we were discussing the risk that we were about to do, and we had discussed it over and over and over, and finally someone on that phone call said, "I'm nervous."
Twice as many home buyers are getting adjustable mortgages.
A huge increase in new.
We almost had stopped thinking and stopped reassessing the risk as we went along. And suddenly we found ourselves with a product that was vastly different from where we started.
With an adjustable rating.
And every little tweak along the way, we'd all said, "Oh, that's okay, that's okay, that's okay," until suddenly we all looked up and said, "Hang on, it's not okay."
The world is still living with a lot of big unresolved problems.
Outros bancos não foram tão cuidadosos. Venderam agressivamente os CDOs subprime aos clientes de todo o mundo. Londres foi o segundo encalhado pelas suas operações de vendas e transações.
The City of London actually did yeoman service in creating some of the nastier structures. They did this offshore. These were not SEC registered deals. These were all private placements, so they were going through the legal loopholes.
Na Alemanha, um grupo de bancos públicos, conhecido por Landesbanks, estava entre os maiores clientes. Desiree Fixler, que trabalhou no JP Morgan, referiu a sua admiração pelo apetite destes bancos por hipotecas subprime.
You knew that a core group of banks in Germany would buy anything. We strongly believed they were very naive. We were amazed that they would buy this. Every single person, every salesperson was envious of that particular salesperson that was able to cover the Landesbanks and IKB, because you were in one of the hottest seats globally. You were going to generate tremendous profit margin. They were big buyers.
IKB was very convinced that they were one of the strongest bank in that area. They were running around telling people how good they are in investing.
O multinational Deutsche Bank fez vários negócios com o IKB.
Did you think at the time that your products were helping IKB, that these were good things for them to buy?
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, we wouldn't have manufactured these products and sold it to them.
So you were bullish on subprime mortgages in the U.S.?
We were bullish on the mortgage market in general, and subprime, which was an element of it. We were not overly aggressive, but we were part of that market, absolutely.
Americans are buying real estate in record numbers. That demand has driven prices.
No final de 2005, os credit default swaps de todo o mundo estavam avaliados em trilhões de dólares e todos os anos duplicava.
Not risk-free.
Existing home sales rose 4.5%, setting a new record.
Did top management at JP Morgan understand credit derivatives?
Yes, they did. Absolutely, they did.
Did they at other banks?
No, not all other banks, certainly not.
Did the regulators understand them?
I don't think the regulators understood. I don't think the credit ratings agencies
the bankers or the regulators fully understood all of the kinds of credit instruments that we're talking about.
In other words, some big banks simply didn't know what they had in terms of risk.
Certainly, they didn't know some of the forms of risk that they had. That's exactly right.
Sales were higher than most regions, up more than 40% in the West and Northeast in October last month.
Os preços das casas continuavam a subir. Os bancos somavam mais e mais CDOs. Teoricamente não havia limite. Um investidor não precisava de possuir quaisquer hipotecas. Os famosos CDOs sintéticos permitiam que os investidores apostassem várias vezes no portfólio de dívida de outra pessoa.
It allowed participants, either buying or selling, so on either side of the market, to take their positions without being constrained by the size of the underlying market.
In synthetic CDOs, all you had to do was make a side bet based on what would happen to this group of mortgages and have that be the basis of the CDO. The fact that someone had done it one time wouldn't stop you from doing it again and again and again.
So how is that different than betting on the outcome of the Super Bowl?
Or a horse race, or a craps table? There's no difference at all. It's just a pure bet by somebody who has no economic interest in what they're betting on.
We're pretty confident that the housing market's not going to go down at all. It's just going to go up.
Within a decade, you have the most phenomenal machine anybody's ever seen.
New homes are selling at the second highest rate on record.
We are in a housing boom, quite strong right now.
Profits soared 93%.
They're expected to dole out $36 billion in bonuses this year.
Everyone was high-fiving. It seemed to be brilliant. The combination of free markets, innovation, and globalization appeared to have delivered this incredibly heady cocktail of tremendous growth.
Top executives will earn as much as 20 to 50 million.
Entre 2003 e 2006, Dick Kovacevic, CEO da Wells Fargo, recorda-se de participar em reuniões com banqueiros e reguladores.
$5 billion in compensation.
Oftentimes what would happen at these meetings is regulators would be there, like Chairman Bernanke, and there might be, I don't know, 30, 40 bankers. And they would often go around the room and say, well, what are you guys seeing out there? You know, what's working? Are you concerned about housing? You know, we're trying to get input. And when they came to me, I would say, this is toxic waste. We're building a bubble. We're not going to like the outcome.
What did your fellow bankers say to you when you told them that you thought this stuff was toxic?
Well, the ones that were in it said I was wrong, and everything's fine. We don't see any losses occurring in this. But we saw risk all over the place.
There's a great set of adages on Wall Street about where risk will flow. And if you ask people, they're basically split between two camps. One says that risk will flow to the smartest person, the person who best understands it, and the other says that risk will flow to the dumbest person, the person who least understands it. And at least based on my experience and my understanding of what has been happening in the derivatives market, it's the latter.
I was amazed at the interest on the part of investors to invest in a product that was highly complex and very risky on top of it.
So let me get this straight. You were first to the party. You developed this tranching of stuff.
That's right.
And writing credit default swaps on it. But now everybody else has jumped into the game.
Everybody wants to do it.
But your team decided to stop. Why did so many others keep going, marching towards the cliff?
Look, very simply, there are certainly some investors, some banks, some borrowers who are a bit greedier than they should be.
Goldman chief Lloyd Blankfein will take home 50.
Ninguém desejava que a festa terminasse. A maioria dos bancos não acreditava que os preços das casas descessem, muito menos num crash.
To imagine losses of that severity required very significant assumptions about the path of the economy, which were just not in people's mind. So it required things like assuming that house prices in the United States fell by 25%. People weren't thinking that way. And as long as house prices never fell, then these risks would never come home to roost. And that ultimately was obviously very flawed logic.
As interest rates rose early this year, home sales slowed, and after years of record appreciation,
businesses and individuals do as well, and the cost of borrowing is going up.
E no final de 2006 começou o desenredo.
Big trouble for millions of American homeowners.
Quando os preços das casas começaram a descer, apenas alguns banqueiros descobriram a bolha em que estavam presos.
Market has turned some mortgages into time bombs.
By 2007-2008, all the smart money knew the game had ended, and all the banks tried to effectively repackage what they were stuck with as quickly as possible and get it off their books. But there was a second parallel movement which was going on, which was all about how can we take advantage of it.
The Dow Jones average seemed in free fall, ending the day down.
Dos bancos da Wall Street que se aproveitou do mercado decadente foi o Goldman Sachs. Segundo uma investigação do Congresso, o banco criou uma série de CDOs que continham subprime tóxico, vendendo-os de seguida aos clientes.
We at Goldman Sachs distinguish ourselves by our ability to get things done on behalf of our clients.
Enquanto o Goldman Sachs, usando credit default swaps, apostou contra eles.
They bet against their own clients, so when their clients lost money, Goldman was making money. Goldman has a little slogan that the clients come first. No, they didn't. Not in these transactions. Goldman came first, second, and third. They were really, I think, the only major bank which made money when the housing bubble burst.
Num acordo com a SEC, Goldman confessou que alguns dos seus produtos de marketing não divulgavam informação importante. Mas defendia que os seus investidores eram instituições altamente sofisticadas.
34 subprime mortgage companies have gone bust in
Cliente era o IKB, o Landesbank alemão.
associated with the subprime market is going to pay the price.
Even when there was a downturn in the markets, they were still buying. I mean, the market is telling them, it's on the screen, there are headlines everywhere, danger, but they still wanted to go ahead.
Did you feel there was an obligation on your part to tell them that, look, wake up, the markets are going down, maybe you should stop buying this crap?
Those discussions, the word crap wasn't used, but I mean, those discussions definitely happened, but they felt that this was just a temporary glitch in an overall bull market. It will recover. It has to recover.
Em julho de 2007, o banco alemão IKB, atulhado de subprimes, foi o primeiro banco a entrar em colapso.
Hundreds of thousands of homeowners are
Foi apenas uma questão de tempo até a crise rebentar na Wall Street.
that could hurt the value of homes nationwide by
We knew that the housing bubble had burst, but we'd been reassured that the problem had been contained. But by the beginning of 2008, it was becoming clear that this was a much, much bigger problem than anybody anticipated.
There was a broad misperception of the risk in housing prices, the widespread view that we could have a regional decline in housing prices, but never a national decline in housing prices, proved to be horribly wrong.
Last week was difficult in the mortgage business. There was talk about problems in funds.
Actively traded stock by far, just a few minutes before that. I think the big question at this point is...
Em Nova Iorque, os bancos tentavam descarregar o que conseguiam, mas a confusão instalara-se. No Citigroup andavam às voltas.
One of the incredible things about Citigroup we now know was, although it was tossing these risks off its balance sheet, those risks came right back, almost like a boomerang. Without knowing it, they had set up one business to offload risk and then completely reversed that business, taking those risks back onto its balance sheet.
It was quite clear to me that a number of really quite large financial institutions had not had the kind of management information systems which allowed them even to know what all their risks were.
That was astounding to you.
It was astounding to me.
The sort of origination of these subprime loans, the creation of the CDOs, that business is gone. The reason why is all those credit default swaps.
Tudo dependia dos credit default swaps. Compensariam como se esperava?
We have known for generations that banks are susceptible to runs. Banks can't function if everybody comes and wants their money at the same moment.
Merrill Lynch, devastated by losses in
Lehman Brothers and the fire sale of Merrill. It's time to take a closer look at AIG.
Nesta altura, era uma corrida a uma companhia de seguros. A AIG estava comprometida com credit default swaps no valor de 440 mil milhões de dólares.
Remember, an insurance contract is only as good as the credit quality of the insurer. They have to pay you. And if they can't pay you, for whatever reason, then this whole process of risk transfer breaks down.
We need to stabilize this industry. It's spread throughout the economy. It could be a very, very dangerous.
September 18th of 2008, when I have a conference of my CEOs, and CEOs traditionally don't read their BlackBerries during meetings, but I kept looking around and noticing that a number of them were. And so I turned to one, we recessed, and I said, "You look like the world has ended." And he said, "I think it has."
The enormity of this situation, like a financial nuclear holocaust.
Some 400-odd billion of credit default swaps.
Another government bailout, AIG securing an $85 billion...
AIG could not conceivably have paid off all of those credit derivatives because it had misunderstood the risks and did not have what we'd call a balanced book or nearly enough capital to back their losses.
Didn't everybody know that AIG was holding a lot of CDSs?
No, there was no disclosure. That's the whole point. And they haven't reported this to anyone else. The other dealers have no idea what's going on. The other banks don't know. Nobody knows. The banks turn this market into their own private game.
It was, in fact, a financial shell game where we were manipulating banking results by moving the risk out through one door, but bringing it back into the banking system by another door. The risk was not leaving the banking system. And everybody in the world was connected through these chains of risk. And if any part of that chain breaks down because they can't honor the contract, the entire system implodes.
A ideia concebida há muitos anos por um grupo de jovens banqueiros do JP Morgan num retiro de fim de semana tinha como intuito reduzir o risco.
Their original idea had been taken and it turned into a Frankenstein monster, which they never dreamt would become so big and spin out of control to that degree.
It was a very scary time. We were in totally new territory. And the notion that Lehman Brothers could be filing for bankruptcy and AIG could be at risk of the same fate was absolutely unprecedented. And the implications, thinking through the implications of that for the health, not just of the US economy, but the world, well, I mean, it wasn't really conceivable to do that. I couldn't get my mind around it. I know others couldn't.
We never saw it coming. We never saw that coming. And I was disappointed, hugely disappointed. I mean, I was part of a market that I believed was doing the right thing. And maybe I was idealistic, maybe I was young, maybe I didn't fully appreciate where we were going, but there was a whole system going on all the way from the borrower of the mortgage all the way through to the investor. There's a whole system of people who maybe were turning a blind eye, maybe were, you know, just, I don't know. It's frustrating to see, certainly.
It shouldn't have happened. Most of our financial crisis in the past is due to some macroeconomic event, an oil disruption, a war. This was caused by a few institutions, about 20, who, in my opinion, lost all credibility relative to managing their risk. And the sad thing is it should never have happened. The management should have stopped it before it got big, and people were suffering for something that should never have happened.
Hoje em dia, a queda é sobretudo sentida nos locais onde o crescimento foi maior, como a Geórgia. O ground zero da crise da subprime, bairros locais e ruas da cidade.
Cities throughout the United States are seeing a rise in vacant and abandoned properties. And that's where the neighbors feel it. As neighbors, we're concerned not so much with the complexities of the subprime mortgage market and derivatives. These things we will hardly ever understand. What we feel on the street is the fact that the house next to us is vacant, abandoned, partially burned. And we wonder how long it's going to be there, how long we will pay the price for that abandonment. A neighborhood cannot survive long when it has a growing inventory of vacant and abandoned properties.
Por vezes, nem sequer se sabe quem são os donos das propriedades.
It's hard to know who owns it because it's been sliced and diced so many ways by investors that it could be somebody in Ireland who owns it. You have the securitized pools where investors own pieces of it. The investors are around the world, literally, and so it's just in no person's land. It's a vacant property, mostly vandalized, and it just sits here, and we can't do anything with it. And the reality is that that plays out across this neighborhood hundreds of times.
That house has a loan that is somewhere lost in a huge financial vehicle put together by some young Turks on Wall Street. It's lost in that billion-dollar package because there's nobody assigned to look after it. And there are whole subdivisions like this, by the way, that are just lost in this great morass. And so it affects Main Street because Wall Street was too greedy. The greed of Wall Street broke Main Street.